We're now going to look at companies. We had a good example of how Accenture actually works when it comes to a framework to support LGBTI workers and employees. So what happens when you have companies like Accenture, Shell for instance, Uber, EY, who have these great programs that seem to be all glossy on the surface and at the headquarters of these companies. But when it filters down to, I think Neville made a good example when we chatted about this. What about the petrol attendants? How are we getting this message down to them? What about the Uber drivers? How do we let them know that we have these programs at headquarters, that it actually filters down to the petrol station, where a service manager and a petrol service manager takes it into account that he needs to consider the rights and of LGBTI member staff? How do they protect them from these homophobes who might come into a petrol station and attack a service attendant? So that discussion is going to be led by Luke Andrews from the South African LGBT Management Forum. Luke, come through.
Okay, so cool. So I'm going to be joined by a panel to assess the ethical case for LGBT inclusion for employees and for suppliers. A little intro, so thanks for the intro. My name is Luke Andrews. I'm a founding director of the LGBT Management Forum. Part of the work I'm doing with the forum is actually on the South African Workplace Quality Index. I hope a lot of you have actually had the opportunity to see some of the press coverage about what we're doing. We're going to be launching some of those results tonight, and I hope as many of you can join us as possible. But I don't want to take the limelight. You're probably going to hear me speak a lot tonight if you are coming through. And I'm also acutely aware that what's standing between you guys and lunch with me and how efficiently I run this panel. So, without further ado, I want to bring on the following colleagues. Tandu Masuku from IBM Business Group. Dulcie Ramakart. I was practicing it so much just now, apologies. Ramakakwe. Rana, a little bit later. It was so good half an hour ago.
I know.
And I'll probably get this one wrong as well. Fabrice Hidart.
Very good.
Okay. Okay, so I think I have to use it there. So what we've been asked to talk about is the question around, do diversity and inclusion initiatives adequately empower LGBTI suppliers and employees? So maybe it'd be worth just a very, very brief intro to each one of you, just to give context to your perspective and to introduce yourselves to the audience.
Hi everyone, my name is Sandy. I work for IBM South Africa. I'm working there for 13 years, and I've been involved in the LGBT plus initiatives for the past 13 years or so.
Hi everyone, my name is Dulcie Ramakwe. I'm the CEO of Accessible Quality Health Services, which aims to address issues of quality to healthcare services. So we run the UK medical centers, currently have 3 in Gauteng and 1 in Mpumalanga, and we also do occupational health and wellness services for corporates.
Hi, my name is Fabrice Hidart. I work for the High Commissioner on Human Rights of the United Nations, and I co-wrote the Standards of Conduct for Business on LGBTI issues that I think you have a copy of, at least of the summary as a pamphlet. There is a longer document, but nobody has ever read it.
Okay, so the theme of tonight, there's a lot of very recurring themes which we're going to hear throughout the day. So I want to be very, very focused on this whole concept of ethics, the ethical mandate of companies to be LGBT inclusive. And I'm quite well known for being a little bit provocative, so I'm going to start with a slightly provocative comment. Employees and suppliers enter into very much a transactional relationship with a company, okay? So you want to be very free market about it. There is a transactional relationship between an employer who is paid a wage or a salary to their employee and to a supplier. Okay. So I want to actually start off with quite a big picture question. Are companies actually ever need to be ethical towards their employees or to their suppliers when we all enter into these relationships? as a transactional relationship? Actually, initially to Fabrice, and then we can pass it.
Well, that's a great question, but it's a question that applies to other human rights. We could say the same thing about child labor, right? That companies are entering an agreement with those children, and those children are being paid, and therefore, what is the problem, right? And the problem is that we have minimal standards called the human rights. As a civilization, we came together. I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was 1948. We came together and we decided that we created standards for ourselves, and those are human rights. So my office, the United Nations, since 2000 has been very clear that the private sector has obligation when it comes to human rights. Not only governments, but the private sector too. And it said so in a document in 2000 called the Global Compact. And then in 2011, we produced another document called the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. It was a little more specific about what were those responsibilities of the private sector when it comes to human rights. And the reason why I translated the guiding principle on the specific issue of LGBTI rights is that when I talk to business, a lot of business, and I would say actually most of the business in the world, understand that they have responsibilities when it comes to child labor or when it comes to human trafficking. But when it comes to equality based on sexual orientation or gender identity, they always feel that it's something that is about being nice, or it's about corporate culture, or it's about the cultural environment in which they evolve. But the truth is that there is no difference. The important thing about human rights is that they are universal and indivisible. And therefore you cannot say, well, I stand for that specific human right, but that human right I don't care much about. And therefore businesses have responsibilities, and you made an excellent point, which is that we use the word should a lot in the document, and the reason is we're trying to appeal to the business, and it's difficult to attract bees with honey. I can't remember the exact expression, but you get it. But the point is that that the four first principles we outline are responsibilities of the private sector. They cannot escape it. They have to respect and promote the human rights of their employees. And then the fifth standard, which is acting in the public sphere, is not a question of responsibility, it's a question of opportunity. We believe that the private sector has a gigantic opportunity to contribute to social change, and it should grab that opportunity. But the first four standards are about human rights, responsibility, and the private sector has no choice. It has to fulfill this responsibility.
And also you work in the health space, so do you believe that actually this whole idea of an ethical responsibility is separate from being able to make money and produce a kind of viable product and make a viable business?
Yeah, because like a myopic view would obviously be transactional, but in a country like South Africa, where you have like only about 17% of people covered by medical aid, meaning you have a population of 83% that either has to access health services out of pocket, or go to the public healthcare system. And then we all know of the attitudes, of the providers in the public space. So as much as we started off by just being about access, because of affordability, we saw that the biggest barrier to accessing healthcare is provider attitudes. So we had to be really careful about what type of doctors do we select to work in our centers, admin staff and everyone, because as LGBTI people ourselves, we have had to access healthcare services before, and we know what type of attitudes we've had to think of, so we like now as a company saying we are taking that responsibility to be different, to like for people to access our services and feel loved and respected in accessing those services.
Yes, from the corporate point of view, I would say definitely yes. And not only yes, but the companies have a responsibility to bring in their business partners and their suppliers as well up to speed with what they're doing. So if one company is all good and doing well in the LGBT space and having all those programs and initiatives, they must bring in also educate their business partners, educate their clients, and educate their suppliers as well. everyone must know what they're about, and the more they do that, then the more companies we can reach and the more people we can reach as well.
No, I've got one place. It's my second one already. I want to bring it into the local context. So we all know, we talk a lot about transformation in South Africa for obvious reasons. And sometimes we forget LGBT people were also kind of regarded as marginalized people through acts like the Immorality Act and other such legislation. But even though in the Employment Equity Act, it talks about discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, it's always thought of as a sub-issue or a side issue. Why is that? And do you think it needs to take a more central role when we talk about transformation? Do we need to be talking about it in a more broader sense, and why? And I want to maybe direct it specifically to my South African colleagues.
No problem. I said what I wanted to say.
Okay. So my observation, especially working for a multinational company, has been they are doing very well at the headquarters, US. I mean, we see a lot of activity there. But when you bring it down to South Africa specifically, nothing much is happening. You've got these diversity groups in the US doing this, in Europe, but in South Africa, none of that. And it's not only just from IBM side. I've spoken to colleagues from other multinational companies as well. They are struggling with the same thing.
Yeah.
When a simple email to employees celebrating Pride Month gets a lot of pushback. But I think mainly it's the executives in South African companies. It's all about EE programs. And what I've also been fighting for is in the EE employment equity programs in the workplace. They don't include LGBTI representatives. There's no representation for LGBTI. That's the first problem. It's race, it's women, even Indian, male, female, people with disabilities, but no LGBTI representation. I think that's the huge barrier, first of all. If we fix that and have that representation, that person that can stand up for LGBT employees and also be able to challenge the executives within the company to make the changes that need to be made.
And I'd like to just draw on some of the results from the index. Actually, is we asked the question around to what extent is LGBT included in your employment equity forums, and it's almost like an equal 50-50 split actually. And there's those companies that see it as see employment equity in the EE forums as very much compliance box ticking exercise, and so there are numbers in which you have to report on, particularly around race, gender, and such like. But actually, if you read the full chapter 2, it talks explicitly about sexual orientation and other aspects of identity. And those other companies have regarded the EE forums as a change agent for the act in its entirety, not in terms of compliance. And I think what you see is those companies are doing it for compliance because they have to do the box ticking. And those companies are really taking the core message of what it stands for about changing inequalities and removing barriers in the workplace. So that's a really interesting observation from my perspective, and I think it's a really important thing. We have this amazing vehicle in South Africa to be able to drive change, and all it's already mandated. Companies aren't necessarily making that the most opportunity. When we're talking about removing barriers, we're talking about removing barriers across all different aspects of identity. What is your perspective? Do you think that actually the whole narrative around transformation should be more narrow, or does it actually need to be broader around removing structural barriers and oppressing all its
I think it definitely needs to be broader. You know, like I can only speak for small business. I can only speak for healthcare providers. You know, so I have, like, in different forums suggested that some of these teachings should go to medical schools. You know, because like now you have people who are responsible for the health and well-being, you know, of communities, like not open-minded enough, you know, to consider, you know, some of the issues that the LGBTI, for instance, encounter. Like I'll give you an example. We do a lot of work in the trans healthcare space, you know, and because of the resistance and the attitudes of the healthcare providers, we see people from as far as Lesotho, you know, Bloemfontein, Zimbabwe coming to Johannesburg to access these services, you know, because no one along their travel to this part of the world, you know, that provides those services.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to kind of bring it back to the ethical case. I mean, what does good look like? So what, if we imagine a world where events like these are really successful and they fulfill what we're achieving, what does good look like for us? What does inclusion look like? It's quite a nice word to have. Can we really pin our finger on what it actually means?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. You know, so there's more than 180 companies that have expressed support for those standards of conduct that we wrote, and those are the largest companies in the world. And we didn't ask them to sign the standard, to sign on it. We asked them to express support. And the reason is that we believe almost no company can fulfill all 5 standards in all markets in which it operates. And the reason is because they face very difficult environment. I mean, as much as there is some kind of a consensus that we are starting to reach in most parts of the world on gender equality and racial equality in the private sector, you know, we are very far from reaching any consensus on LGBTI issues. And you know, some of the companies that have expressed support for the standard that I really like Google or you know, have actually taken steps which could be considered a violation of human rights. So as an example, in Indonesia, Google had to remove 74 applications from its Android market at the request of the government because those applications had LGBT content. And you know, what can they do? I mean, frankly, in an environment in which there is such an hysteria about LGBTI issues, it's very often about whether getting kicked out of the market or staying in the market and complying with, you know, and I think it comes, you know, on LGBTI inclusion, a lot of the companies I talk to say, well, you know, I'm ready to make efforts in this market and in this market, but in the Emirates and or in Malaysia, you know, I feel very uncomfortable talking about diversity and inclusion. So I will tell you that to me, a company that is doing well on LGBTI issues, a company that can respond to the question, what are you doing, with a list of all the activities that they are undertaking on a journey to respect the human rights of LGBTI people. And something that we need to talk about is that for a lot of companies, and you kind of alluded to it, for a lot of companies it remains a little bit of posturing, meaning that when it's a pleasant market where it's very much proven that it affects positively your bottom line to be pro-LGBTI, they are very vocal about, you know, their diversity and inclusion policy, and they act in the public sphere, they fund the float at Gay Pride, but as soon as it's somewhat of a difficult market, including India or Singapore, they shut down everything. And you know, something that I was discussing with you when I was in the back was this idea that I would love to see the indexes that measure what companies are doing, to start measuring also how they are acting in the public sphere, because I think that we have to be, you know, as much as we have to recognize the fact that the private sector has huge opportunities and is doing a great job, we also have to be wary of pinkwashing and doing the minimal to affect your bottom line.
Dulcie, what does inclusion look like to you? So you spoke a lot about people accessing your services, and for you that's inclusion. If there's anything you want to add to that, what does inclusion mean to you and to the people you serve, and also to you as a business owner?
I think inclusion for me would mean even people who are not LGBTI do not now see this service as excluding them. You know what I mean? So bottom line, you know, is still quite important, and maybe when we talk to companies about inclusion, we should be also talking about how it affects their bottom line not to be inclusive, you know, so I think that would make a big difference.
Okay, inclusion for me is me going to work and not having to hide that I was with my partner last night. We attended, maybe we watched a movie or something along those lines. For me to be free to talk about my life and not feel like there's someone who's suddenly uncomfortable because of that. Parents don't know what to do. They can see that the child is different, but they don't know how to handle it. So those things, if we address them in the workplace, they can attend, you know, those sessions and they can get information from them. and they are able to help their kids or their brothers or siblings or whoever that they have in the family that is part of the community. So the companies have a really big power. I mean, my story, I came out at work before I even came out at home. And I felt safer at work than I did at home. Everyone knew, but no one they spoke about it. So we never discussed it until I discussed it at work. And then I was able to go home and be able to face it head on at home. So that's the power that the companies have, that they can change lives.
Well, I'm not even going to compete with that ending comment. So, thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you very much for closing on that. That was really, really special. Cool. So I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to dismiss the audience. So that's the word. And we'll. Oh, do we want to?
You have 7 minutes.
We have 7 minutes. Okay, right, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's keep it slick. And then we can, cool, go ahead, so yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you've really touched on the issue of business and human rights. That was very important. South Africa, the Human Rights Commission had a symposium on business and human rights, and we are updating the country guide. And I would just advise everybody to look at the Business and Human Rights Country Guide, which is on our website, because it specifically identifies sexual orientation as, an area that needs to be addressed within business when you're looking specifically at human rights. And I think that that's the point, is that these are fundamental, inalienable, global human rights. And as it is the 70th anniversary of the Declaration, it would be an opportune time for you to lean on the South African government and say, well, what have you done, or to raise that issue. It's a great time for us to advocate on human rights and the issues that we are discussing here on the 10th of December. So if you want to discuss further, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about how we do that going forward.
Gentleman here with Yusuf.
Can I say one quick thing? I coincidentally came across a website last night called biasinterrupters.com. There are a lot of toolkits there on interviewing people and advertising for jobs, retention. I thought some of the ideas were really clever about not to put emphasis on where you dress and all sorts of biasinterrupters.com. You'll find that useful. There are lots of free toolkits.
Yeah, I think this is
Something that really strikes me when I talk to business is that very often, when I talk to business that are not the global business, that have no choice but to position themselves on LGBTI issues, I had a discussion recently with Kempinski, with the hotel chain, and basically what he was telling me, I'm kind of paraphrasing, is that now that there is marriage equality in many countries, what are you complaining about? If you want to get to the top of the company, just work hard like everybody else, right? And to me, that's the definition of privilege, is that if you have not experienced discrimination, if you're not a black mother in the United States, or if you are not, a woman in the private sector, you really believe that discrimination does not exist. And so we also have to make that job of highlighting this bias, even class bias, right? The way you express yourself and the way you dress, that gets in the way of equal opportunity. But something that I always have to go back to is that the decision makers very often have not experienced discrimination, and therefore they believe that discrimination does not exist.
Sorry, I just want to add something, and I think we go back again to human rights the whole time. And for me, that's more, again, or the law is a compliance thing, but I think being ethical as a company has a way broader meaning to it, and being an ethical professional, because a lot of us work in professional environments where we have professional designations that we love to put behind our names because it increases our salary, but what does that really mean? Does it mean that if I want to be a professional CA, chartered accountant, how can I discriminate against a colleague who doesn't have the same view as me in terms of sexuality or gender identity? So I think as a business, leadership should start asking themselves the question as to what is our ethical standards? What is our core values? And if our core values are to respect difference and I don't want to say force, but almost ignite diversity, how can we step away from this discussion? And how can we step away from retracting stuff because it is not legal? Why don't we send out all our communication to Africa? That's the question we had earlier. Because if that's part of our core values, you cannot be half ethical, can you? You cannot, you're either ethical or you're not. So where do we draw that line?
I think to add to that, it takes a few trailblazers to really stick their neck above the parapet to show, and for organisations like this, and many of the organisations represented here, to actually highlight that and draw the spotlight to those people who are doing it, to say, you know what, add some transparency to say, these people are trailblazers, these people are doing it, there's now no excuse. But it takes a little bit of guts for companies to do that, and I think the whole thing around, are you ethical or are you not, is really important to stick to where these people. I've got two here, I'm kind of hogging all the microphones. Sorry, I'm taking more mics, everyone. You
It's taking all the mics. No, you know, when I was writing the standard, I did a consultation in Uganda, and there were a few activists that showed up from East Africa, but there was not one single. There's one business that showed up, which and I had tried really hard to write to companies abroad, saying, could you weigh on your general manager, so he showed up, and nobody showed up. And what I thought, it's not only that they find it's a controversial topic, it's that they find it completely irrelevant to the Ugandan context. They believe that this is a bullshit Anglo-Saxon issue, that it's being pushed by a bunch of wishy-washy Americans. You know what I mean? And until you fight that, until you show that this is relevant to Uganda, and that there is indeed the same prevalence of same-sex attraction and the same prevalence of non-conforming gender identity, and that therefore, even Ugandan businessmen that think, I'm here to make money, why are they annoying me, have to start positioning themselves on this issue. And that's very hard, because even in France, I talk to businessmen that think that this is a bullshit Anglo-Saxon issue, or pushing.
I don't know if anyone saw a recent tweet that went viral around the recent passing legislation in India. It should be very ironic that I should be saying this actually. But he talks about the criticism of the passing of removal of legislation which passed last week about anti-same-sex relations, and the criticism that it was a westernization of India. And he actually pointed out that it wasn't those laws which were in place before colonization. This was actually the decolonization of India.
Yes.
And there's some really interesting literature on kind of perceptions of sexuality and gender fluidity within African communities and cultures pre-colonial period. And I think it's really interesting to have those facts and figures behind us before people start saying things like that. This is actually a decolonization of the laws of these countries, and actually I think we need to be embracing that narrative.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if I should say that.
All right, thanks guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.